My name is Tanvi. I'm a rising senior at Scarsdale High School, and for my main project, I'm creating a hand gesture controlled car with a robotic arm. So for my first milestone, I figured out how to move the robotic arm using the flex sensors. So the first thing I had to do was determine how flex sensors work. So I figured out that there's a thin layer of carbon under a layer of metal, under a thin layer of metal electrode. And so when you bend the flex sensor, the amount of metal that's in contact with the carbon increases, which causes the resistance of the flex sensor to decrease. So what I had to do after that was I had to connect each flex sensor to the Arduino, and then using a code that I found off the Arduino site, I was able to determine the resistance of each flex sensor when they were bent and unbent. And so I recorded those values down. Then I had to determine how the servos work. So what I figured out was that depending on the pulse that's sent through the signal wire, there's a motor inside the servo which will rotate to a certain position, and it will hold that position, and it can be any position that's up to 180 degrees from the original position of the motor. So what I did was I connected each servo individually to the Arduino, and then using a sweep function that I found on the Arduino site, I was able to move each motor 180 degrees back and forth. So what that did was, for this servo here, it opened and closed the claw, and for this one, it rotated the arm back and forth. So after doing these two things, I had to figure out how to combine the code from the flex sensors and from the servos, so that I could control the servos using only the flex sensors, not just Arduino code. So what I did was I used if statements that allowed me to determine the movement of the servo. So I made the servo move 180 degrees depending on which flex sensor was bent. So for example, I used servos 1 and 3 to control, flex sensors 1 and 3 to control this servo here. So when flex sensor 1 is bent, I wrote the code so that this claw would open, and then when flex sensor 3 is bent, I wrote the code so that it would close, and then I did the same thing for 2 and 4 with this one, which just moved it back and forth. So the main challenge I faced in doing this was determining how to combine the codes from the flex sensors and servos so that they worked together fluently, and this just took trial and error, and eventually I figured that part out. And so for my second milestone, I'm going to try to control the movement of the cart, which will be done by controlling the DC motors and the wheels on that using two separate Arduinos, so I'll have to do that wirelessly. So that's my second step. Okay, so when I bend the first flex sensor, the robotic claw is going to open. And then when I bend the third, it's going to close. And so 2 and 4 control this servo, which is going to make it move back and forth. So if I bend number 4, it's going to go towards the table on this side. And then when I bend 2, it's going to come back to me.